Okay, we're talking here with Julia Coffey about the notion of gazing back. Um, Julia is a researcher, sociologist at the University of Newcastle. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Julia, in terms of what work you're doing?
Sure, yep. So I'm an associate professor in sociology and co-direct the Newcastle Youth Study Centre with Steve. Um, yeah, I've been working on a project for the last few years on young people's image editing practices and yeah, about I guess how they navigate the gaze that is usually directed upon them, how they sort of work
Mm.
that from their own experience. Um, yeah, so interested in embodiment, gender, and social media, really.
Yeah, and so this is work we've done together. So, we've written a paper that's under review at the moment. So that's kind of what we're talking about here today. We've already looked in the course about the data gaze. It's kind of one of the key concepts of the course overall. I'm not going to kind of go into any more detail about it here. Students should be familiar with it already, but like we're interested in, I suppose, in not just the way that kind of companies are using young people and their data to kind of, influence algorithms, all the kind of data stuff that we know that they're doing, but think about the ways that young people are also kind of maybe cognizant of that or not, but also maybe how they're kind of gazing back at these machines and maybe finding ways to make do and sometimes even resist. So yeah, can you tell us a little bit about this idea of gazing back?
Yeah, so I mean, gazing back is an interesting way, I think, of looking at the practices of focusing on what young people are actually doing in this setting that they do not choose, right? They don't choose to live in a world that has image editing apps that show you how, well, the machines often show young people how they think they should look through automated filters, for example. Um, so I guess yeah, trying to look at this as returning the gaze is often about how, yeah, focusing really on young people's practices and taking them seriously. Um, I guess it can be similar to the structure agency debate in many ways because young people are often, don't, as I said, don't have control over the circumstances that they're operating in. But perhaps gazing back is a way of looking and taking seriously young people's, everyday mundane living with the gaze, navigating it, and sometimes gazing back in being critical of what they see going on. So um, we'll talk about some examples of
Mm,
this. Like they can't really change the gaze. You can't change what sort of image culture is, for example.
yeah,
Young people can't really decide, for example, to change how used to be magazines, now how data companies or image editing apps, how they create those filters and the norms that they're built into those. But
yeah,
they can critique what they're doing
yeah,
and say, well, hang on, why is my nose being made smaller? Who's deciding that?
yeah.
Um, I'm not deciding that, so someone else is, and it's a way of kind of gazing back at power, I think,
Mm.
without expecting young people can actually themselves alone change how that power works.
Yeah, it's kind of an argument like that we do in youth studies work that kind of young people aren't, necessarily cultural dupes here. There's this idea that they're just kind of blindly using these things and following trends and suffering the negative consequences because of that. And we kind of always write from a perspective that that's unrealistic. People live in the world and therefore are exposed to what's going on, and like all these technologies have become ubiquitous. And
Mhm.
so, um, yeah, the way that people kind of develop strategic dispositions to negotiate this kind of stuff, right? And people kind of end up with different levels of expertise or engagement or even caring about it. But this means there's
Mm.
kind of multiple ways that people, react to being part of the gaze that they can't really escape. Yeah.
Yeah. People will rarely just sort of straightforwardly absorb this gaze
Mm.
unproblematically. Usually they'll be
Yeah.
aware something is going on and being like, why does this feel weird? I don't
Yeah.
like this. And then they may continue to use, say, the app anyway,
Yeah.
and just sort of move past that discomfort or ambivalence. But it's never a straightforward like the hypodermic needle model.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's usually some kind of, turmoil going on
Mm.
as part of that I think our work in a range of different ways tries to get at.
Yeah.
Not to say this will solve everything, but just to be like, well, there is something going on in the middle here that
Yeah.
might be interesting for other young people to know about. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And so we kind of follow here notions of algorithmic tactics, kind of ways of kind of making do in everyday life. And you've been particularly in your work interested in this idea of the virtual gaze, right?
Yeah. So through it's really through some of the examples we were looking at in the previous part of the lecture. So in the example where Freya was seeing herself in the mirror and wishing that she could make those same changes that she could through the app to make her body more perfected, wishes she could do that in real life. We sort of saw this as an example of the virtual gaze or as a data gaze, really, because you come to sort of see your body through this particular practice anyway, you can, as data to be edited, and the way that apps present this, and we'll have a look at some examples next, is really um, the forensic gaze that young people are already using to know what should be changed about their physical features in order to kind of be more optimized. It appears as data. You can change the toggle on the on filters or on any kinds of different editing technologies to move it up and down the scale, like make the changes more or less, and
Mm.
feeling and sort of you come to apprehend yourself as through the screen, which is what Freya was talking about. So this is a real kind of, I guess, the pinch point where the data physical interface is you can actually apprehend it, we argue, through this example.
Yeah.
Um, and it's a really good example of gazing. I think we're gazing back through even being able to kind of isolate that practice or that experience as being something that's meaningful in this particular moment that we're in, where editing technologies have arisen at the same time as visual AI technologies, and now they're just kind of here and operating.
Mm.
And obviously, our lives are so datafied already anyway. It's sort of happening in a kind of full embodied way suddenly that we're realizing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's have a look at some of the examples. So the golden ratio is a particularly important thing here. So can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so this is what we mean by the data gaze or through seeing the self as editable data. So this is an example of beauty scanner, which is a face analyzer. It's one of the earlier facial editing apps or sort of just beauty platforms, really. And I love this example because it sort of says all the quiet stuff out loud in terms of how beauty apps are made, what sort of knowledges they're based on. These are not sort of just pre-existing natural, you know, things that exist. These are completely social and cultural, but they're presented as sort of inalienable, scientific,
Mm.
sort of as unquestionable in terms of their status. So the different measurements you can see there, and it says it in the description, it's based on the golden ratio. And if you look up the golden ratio, you'll get Galileo, right? You get a Nautilus shell, and this sort of sense that the golden ratio, this is an objective measure of beauty that is as real as the stars and are sort of as real as all the theories that were helped to create, understanding of physics and the natural world, and
Yeah.
the kind of idea that faces should be symmetrical, that more symmetrical faces are more beautiful as an objective thing. This usually often has a whole lot of evolutionary psychology nonsense that gets sort of attached to it. People get very excited about the golden ratio because you get to therefore, I mean, you can do so much problematic stuff with this. This leads to eugenics, leads to very, very, very problematic kind of notions, particularly regarding gender, race. You get to hierarchized versions of human beings and being able to excuse all kinds of forms of discrimination on the basis of this. I know it seems like I'm drawing a long bow, but this kind of scientism, beauty as scientific and unchallengeable, unquestionable, is any, it's just so dubious and has a very long history
Yep.
of incredibly discriminatory, violent practices that go along with it that have, yeah, could do a whole lecture on this one. But anyway,
Yeah.
um,
And so, but it's a really good example too, like it, how it attaches this kind of terrible, discursive history to a quantifiable score is a really good
mm,
example of this kind of data gaze in action and how it kind of works, right?
yeah, exactly. And participants referred to the golden ratio as being how they learnt to use facial editing apps. And it really helped for them, really problematically legitimated the beauty norms that they were experiencing and seeing themselves through when they edit.
Mm,
Um, so um, Freya, this isn't a video of Freya, but it shows the editing practices that she's using, and it's sort of she didn't talk about it in this way, so this is why this image is useful. But um, yeah, Freya, who we saw in the last one, talked about how um, the kind of golden ratio is built into the tools, so you can just tap on say Facetune. There's a filter, a beauty filter that's like beauty. So you can just be
mm,
like, make me more beautiful.
mm.
And then the app will read your face through the golden ratio, right? So the golden ratio is built into the tools of filters. They're built into visual AI filters now as well,
Mhm.
which makes the gap between who decides even greater if it's being sort of therefore folded in
Yep.
this very problematic golden ratio as an objective human model of beauty. Um, So yeah, this really trains people how to see themselves.
Mm.
And it's really important to be critical of it because it doesn't come from nowhere. This is like the most human social and cultural norm that exists, but it's presented as though it's completely unquestionable.
That's
And it is
science.
difficult.
Yeah.
Science. It's yeah. So I think there's something, it feels more powerful when a computer is telling you how you should look. It feels it harder to challenge. If a person said that to you on the street, you probably tell them to fuck off. But if a computer does it when you're by yourself and you're wanting to see what you look like through this golden ratio app,
Yeah.
then you're like, oh God, maybe there is something objectively wrong with me instead of being like, what, where did these norms come from?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so here's this particular example of
Mm.
like shaping and skin grafting.
Yeah, exactly. So you can become it is such a sort of micro practice, and other scholars talk about this as for a digital forensic gaze. We sort of also add the data gaze to this, or
Mm.
editable data to this, because um, you can zoom in so close and see things that just are not visible really to anybody else, but participants have such highly trained image reading capacities to be able to do this. So yeah, Abigail's just really matter-of-factly talking about how, um, as she's narrating here, yeah, so I can just like, yeah, this bit, I like this part of my face better, so I'll just patch this. There's like a patch tool, and it sort of, you can't see it because I've had to anonymize it, but it comes up like a sort of net. It looks like a net that comes across your cheek, and then
Yep.
you can snip it and you replace a different part of it on your face. So you're just really kind of moving parts of your body and features around in this um quite it's quite a confronting thing to watch, actually, similar to the last one of the cinching,
Mm.
because it feels violent
Mm.
to the observer, I think, watching someone else do it, particularly when it's a surprise.
Yep.
And the kind of compartmentalizing of it kind of feels like dehumanizing in a way to view yourself as just kind of these data points.
Mm.
Um,
Yep.
but yeah, it's obviously such a yeah, it's such a widespread practice. So it's a really interesting thing to think about. I think about what this means for technology and humans and how we understand ourselves through these kind of tools.
Yep. And she's kind of Freya reflects on that here in terms of um, if it was just on the screen. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So this was the same example that was
Yep.
in the last set as well. And this was one of those moments in the project for us where we were like, oh, wow, okay, this is something really important is happening here that we need to theorize. This is why you need social theory to be able to take this kind of example seriously. Be like, well, there is actually something fundamentally changing at the moment when the self becomes compartmentalized into data points through this intensely intimate practice
mm,
that connects with beauty, gender norms over, decades and decades. The virtuality of this and the datification of it is absolutely central for understanding not just this is a body image example, but as something new happening through the technologies and through people's interactions with them.
yeah, 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 right. So, um, the work you've been doing is kind of coming up with these new ways of understanding virtual embodiment and the data gaze. And we're kind of talking a little bit about gazing back.
Mm.
So can you kind of reflect a little bit about this now that you're at the end of this project, kind of in terms of what it all means?
I think this kind of connects to the last lecture as well. Giving people, not just young people, but a way to a kind of a lens to understand their own practices through that are not just purely personal and around like, oh, just get off social media, get off your phone, stop using the apps.
Mm,
A way of gazing back collectively can be really powerful. And that's kind of what happened in some of the workshops in a kind of unexpected, or that wasn't the aim of the workshops to be like a consciousness raising thing.
yeah.
That there is something powerful about being more open about what the apps do, what the filters do, talking about like teaching people about the golden ratio as a problematic thing. And whereas on social media and through these apps, it's presented as this objective scientific thing. So I think this notion of the data gaze and the concept of gazing back is about questioning and challenging what technologies are doing, what is built into them.
Mm,
And it's not possible to simply reject them. It's about being much more critical and trying to uncover what the apps are doing. And as you'll hear in Kia's next lecture, it's almost impossible even for filter developers to know exactly what changes are being automated
yeah.
through this gaze. It's a huge black box here. This isn't just something that people can somehow become more educated about.
Mm,
It's actually very, very hidden and deliberately obfuscated
yeah.
in visual AI processes, in Meta. If you've ever tried to get any kind of data from any of these places
Mm,
about why they're doing what they're doing, let alone what they're doing, there's a reason they don't want us to know. So
mm,
gazing back is a much kind of broader critical lens, I think, that helps us to question the kinds of, particularly the beauty norms and the visual cultural norms that are baked into these technologies, and to realize that there's something very dubious going on
mm,
here.
yeah.
That we were able to critique these ideals much more openly in previous generations, and feminist theory has been really good at that. But there's a lot more hidden now that requires really the same kind of analysis and the same theories, just in a more understanding how it works in a digital sense as being
Yeah.
more powerful potentially.
Yeah. 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 So to sum up, can you tell us a little bit about where your research is going in this field? I know you've got some plans to do other projects, and particularly how this overlaps. Like you got this, this visual kind of selfie data, people taking selfies, people's faces are used more and more in terms of kind of getting access to things,
Mm.
and security measures and all that kind of stuff. Can you tell me what's going to happen next?
Yeah, so the same sort of facial scanning technology that's used for beauty filters, uh, that's usually often connected to the golden ratio in terms of any automated changes that occurred. That same facial scanning technology has been used to try to train um, facial recognition processes, and visual AI is being, or AI computer science is being applied to all of those processes to automate surveillance, to automate biometric verification, age verification. all of this is such an interesting space because these changes have kind of happened pretty quietly in what seem to be separate spheres of, say, facial imaging apps, but the same companies are using the same technologies in surveillance. So,
Yeah, so there's
and
a mission kind of function creep risk going on here.
massively. And to begin with, the biometric recognition scanning would be done through banks or through government departments. Say for, if you go to the airport now to go overseas, your face is your passport.
Mm,
You still have a passport, probably not for too much longer,
mm,
really. But when social media companies are using those same verification tools, say in age verification that's happening for young people on social media right now, and in gambling and some other settings, that data goes to the platforms
yeah,
and is covered sort of by each platform's own policies differently and does not have the control or regulation of governments. So facial data has never been more valuable. It's never, but there is a vast sort of gap in understanding about what could happen with data breaches when they will inevitably occur because you can't just change your face
yeah,
easily if your facial data gets breached. So there's a huge infrastructure of data that underpins all of this. Um, but yeah, facial data, it's very valuable. So
yeah,
be careful with
yeah.
it.
Excellent. That's a good way to conclude. Okay, thanks for your time again.
Thank you.
Thanks.